So, on today's episode, I wanted to talk about goals, right? What were my goals and how can you accomplish your goals, right? Worked for me, and this might help you as well. So, I think one of the things that I want to start with is just starting from my childhood. I think I've spoken about this in other episodes as well. I was a very competitive kid when I was younger. So, I think until this day kind of follows me. I'm very competitive. I want to say, perfectionist in many ways. So when I was a child, it was always I had to be the best at the games I played. I had to be the best at when I was doing things. I was doing, how do I want to put this? It was a class where we made a rug, right? So, and then I had a class where we did embroidery. I had a class when I was making artificial flowers. So it's just everything that I did and I was part of. I wanted to be the best at it, and I always worked hard. But just to kind of talk about some of those goals, right? It was just, I wanted to be the best at whatever that was. And I always did. I accomplished it. I worked really hard. And for me, it's always been that. I've always worked hard and got to where I wanted to be. So one of the things that I did was that didn't really end up working out for me was dance. I love to dance. And so since I was a little girl, my dad always told me, dance is not your future. Dance is not going to be a future for you. So, where I was taking all these classes back home in, the embroidery class and the rug, how to make a rug, and all of these classes that I was taking, they also had a dance where I could actually do traditional Armenian dance, or you could do other things as well if you wanted to. So I started going to dance, hiding it from my dad, and eventually he caught on to it. And so that was short-lived. So that was one of the goals that I didn't accomplish because just my dad just never thought that was the best thing that I needed to do for myself. So that kind of ended there. But other than that, it's interesting because the way I learned most of the time was by listening, right? So I would be in class, and back home, the way that we basically studied was we had to study the material, and then they would just randomly call you and you would have to basically speak in front of the class about whatever that subject that you learned, basically. So a lot of times I would just listen in class. And so when I would listen in class, it was pretty much gather a lot of the information, and I didn't really need to read per se. And I was a straight A student. And I basically would just literally listen to whatever the teacher would talk about. And then if they would call me, or if we're talking about the specific paragraph or whatever that was, I would literally just glance at it that day as the teacher was talking to, different students, or different students were, out there speaking about this particular subject. And I would just glance at it, and then I would go and, I always spoke, about whatever that was. And I always got A's. So that's kind of how I did most of my lecturing, like other, not curricular, but if it was history or if it was, science, whatever it was, right? Like obviously not math, because math, we didn't do that. Math was actually testing. So, and I was pretty good at math too. So I didn't really struggle. But yeah, that's kind of how it was when I was in school, and just going through different experiences and doing different things. And so that was always exciting, right? As I was, growing up. And eventually I started, and as I transitioned, to the US, there was just so many goals. The goals of me actually speaking English, and because I didn't speak a word of it, but me actually speaking English and being able to speak it well, where I didn't have an accent, where it wasn't really all of that. My past wasn't really following me into my future. So I really, really worked hard at that just to be sure. And I mean, as I speak to. I think until this day, you could still hear some of my accent and some of the words, and I'm proud of that. I, come from speaking 3 languages, so I think I'm okay. I'm not worried about that part of it so much, but I really worked hard. And I know that, there was a lot of other kids that came around the same time, around my age, that really have a thick accent. And so I really worked hard to prevent some of that. So I think I've done a good job. I'm happy with it. It's gotten me pretty far, I would say, of all the goals that I wanted to accomplish. I think that was one of the things that I did well. And then, of course, it was just going to the different stages, right? Graduating high school. I wanted to graduate high school early. So I did. I ended up actually taking every zero period, after class, I stayed just to be able to finish my classes on time. And of course, I was an early grad from high school. I was going to college second semester of my high school year already. And even my first semester of high school, I only had 4 classes, which basically it's the stuff that you need to take, government, economics, right? That you have to take in your senior year. And so those were the classes that I had. And so that was one of my other goals that I wanted to accomplish, which I did. And of course, at that time, I was already working. I started working at a very young age. And my other goal was for me to buy my own car. So I wasn't burdening my parents. And so I ended up saving. I think I started working at like 14. I know it was like literally illegal, and this man was just paying us from his own pocket. I was doing pictures for schools, so it wasn't really much that you were doing. And I remember just saving every penny that I had just to be able to, afford a car. And so eventually I changed jobs. Once I turned 16, I ended up obviously working at a retirement home, and I was promoted to being a supervisor for the kitchen. And so, and at this point, I think after working there for 2 years, I was in college. Was it 2 years? Maybe a little bit after a year, because I was already in college, and I literally, at the time, we had pagers, and I would be in class and they would be paging me. And I was just like, okay, this is not going to work. I need to, go in a different route. So eventually I ended up leaving that job. But going back to my point of literally saving every penny, I did end up buying my own car. And so my dad helped me, purchase the car. And so I had this little, car that and honestly, I was happy because it literally took me from point A to point B. I was walking the whole time, everywhere. So it was just so nice to be able to have a car and drive to go to school and, go into work. And so just being independent. And I've always wanted that. I've never relied on anyone. I didn't want to burden my parents. Obviously, they were older when they came to this country. So I really wanted to handle a lot of things on my own. And I always have. Even just growing up, my parents would always kind of put a lot of the decisions on me, making the decisions for myself, because I had to make the decision of what was going to work for me and what wasn't going to work for me. So, but yeah, I ended up buying my car. So far up to this point, every goal that I had set, I accomplished, and I was really happy, and I was doing really well. I learned English pretty quickly. And so, going from there, as I kind of transitioned out of my position at the retirement home, I started working at a pharmacy while I was in college, because I was studying to become a pharmacist. So I started working at a pharmacy and a durable medical equipment company. And, obviously my goals there didn't really continue because I got married. And so I was super young when I got married. And I just ended up my goals changed. And so I needed to support my husband at the time. He was in the military, so we ended up moving to Colorado, and he was there for 4 years. And I still was working at the pharmacy and still was, going to school, I still wanted to continue my school, my education. And then, surprise, surprise, I get pregnant. And so, it's sometimes when you set certain goals, God has other plans for us, right? So then I had to stop because because I was pregnant and I didn't have the best pregnancy. I was really sick most of it. And so I couldn't really go to school. All I could do was really barely keep a job because I was sick most of the time. And I had to help my husband at the time. So it was just one of those things where something had to give, right? And sometimes even with our goals, we can set these goals, but it really just depends on, what happens. Sometimes it's not always, it doesn't really go the way you plan. And this really used to upset me a lot when I was younger. I would always think about it. Would used to make me so angry because of course it was my goals. How could this go this way? Like, how could it? And of course I was super excited that I was pregnant. I mean, I was, we weren't expecting that, and we weren't trying at the time because we were just newly married. But it just so ended up happening. And so, again, sometimes you just cannot, get involved in God's plan. So I just basically had to adjust some things, and I realized obviously later on in life that I shouldn't be fighting anything. If it's meant to be, it will be. If it's yours, it will be. So if it's meant to happen, it will be. So I think those are some of the things so I had to, after I had my daughter, I still had to continue working because of when I was in Colorado, I didn't know anybody. We didn't have anybody. We didn't have family. So nobody could really help us. So I had to, basically, we were switching shifts to take care of her. So I would go to work. My husband would, take care of her. And then I would come home and then he would go to work. So it's just like, I couldn't go to school at that time because I had a baby. And so, but after she was a couple years old, and he was finished with his 4 years of his commitment with the military, we ended up moving back to California. So when we moved back to California, of course, my parents were there. And so they helped me with my daughter. And then she started eventually going to kindergarten and school. And so it kind of freed up time for me to be able to, yes, I was working, but I was still working at that time. I was able to go back to school. So I was working in pharmacy and I still continued my education. And so eventually I ended up working at the county hospital in the pharmacy. And so when I was working at the county hospital, I started talking to the nurses there. And so, and as I was talking to the nurses, and at this point I had been in the pharmacy for, I would say, maybe good 5 years or so. And, between, when I started and, when I was trying to take these classes and going in that direction. And I mean, I knew a lot of the medications at that point, names and whatnot. So school wasn't so difficult. But when I started talking to the nurses, I was just so excited. I thought, oh my goodness, there's just a whole another thing. And I just looked at my life and what my purpose was. And at this point, I was just kind of looking at pharmacy and I was thinking, is this really what I want to be doing? I don't know. Is this really what I'm like the last stop for people being, obviously people come to the pharmacy when they're sick. You're the last stop that they're pretty much, after a hospital or, doctor's office, whatever it is, right? You're the last stop that they're seeing, right? And so all of their just anger and frustration and all of that was just like all coming to you, at the end. So, and it wasn't that so much for me, but it was just the job itself to me was just not fulfilling enough. I think that was what really I made the decision of kind of pivoting and thinking, you know what, this isn't really for me. So even this is why I want to be talking about this, because you know what, yeah, you set goals that you're going to accomplish these things, but somewhere in the way, things just come up and things are just, they change and they shift. And so sometimes your goals change. And so then I shifted my major, obviously, into nursing. So I decided I was going to go to nursing school. So that's where I ended up. I ended up in nursing school, but it helped me a lot. And, the background that I had, it wasn't really a waste for me per se, because that component of it in school was super easy for me. Obviously, I had been in it for a good amount at that point. And so it was just, I guess it was a great addition to, what I was already studying. Obviously, I didn't know all the other things. And so, but the pharmacy part of it was just super, super easy for me. So that was the great part. And obviously I graduated at the top of my class from nursing school. So, that was another goal of mine. Again, my competitiveness is like, oh my God, if I had like one mistake on my exam, I was just, I was like, oh my goodness, this is like the end of the world. That's kind of how I took it. I know it's silly, but that's just how it was. And I was always thinking, oh my goodness, like I'm going to have people's lives in my hands. And so I need to make sure that, I know all of this stuff. And so I would study really, really, really hard and making sure that I knew everything, so I think that that's kind of where a lot of a lot of the drive that I have and just the competitiveness helps, right? And I think even if you don't have it, it doesn't mean you can't accomplish your goals. It's really honestly comes down to discipline and consistency. That's really what it's about ultimately. So for me, it's if you are looking at accomplishing something, it really takes a certain amount of time, patience. I mean, that's one thing that I had to learn in my life. I'm someone that really makes a decision very quickly and moves on. And I'm getting older and I got older, I really kind of learned to take a step back and reevaluate. And that's another one of my really big recommendations is don't try to, there are things that of course you need to rush on, right? There are certain things like in business and things like you have to move quickly. But I think that when it comes down to certain goals and certain decisions, I think you really have to take some time to think about it. Is this really what you want to do? Because that's time that you're going to be putting into that. And it's time that you're not going to get back anymore. So it's unfortunate to say this, but that is the reality. So as I, gone and graduated nursing school, it was really, I didn't even know where I was going to be. And I just knew that I wanted to start somewhere. And then I wanted to go through different areas of nursing for me to really kind of learn all aspects, right, of nursing. And so just so it ended up being, I got into case management. And case management is so big. There's just so many components and so many things that comes with that. And so I just kind of fell in that and grew from there, right? And then leadership and, I wanted to become a leader. And so I got that opportunity to do that as well. And so I think those were some of my goals. And even in business, I was working and at that time, I had already been working as a nurse for quite some time when I decided, right, to, as I've been speaking to this in different episodes as well, as I've gotten into, deciding that I wanted to do something bigger and impact in a bigger way. So when I decided to do that, it was, I just thought about how do I want to tackle this, right? It's like, how do I want to approach it? Number one, I'm not familiar with any of this. This is brand new to me, right? Real estate is brand new to me, like nursing and real estate, two different areas completely. And so when I decided to do that, I was pretty comfortable with nursing at that time. And I was like, you know what? My focus is really going to be, I had pretty much learned whatever I had to learn. Focus was really going to be the real estate component. And so I obviously, took courses, got education, and I really needed to get there pretty quickly, pretty fast. So I did that. But I think one of the other goals was, throughout my nursing career was that I wanted to be able to obviously have the experience in every area. So it made me a person that kind of knew all aspects. And if I needed to take care of someone through the continuum of this, what does that look like? Am I understanding all components of the patient as a whole? So I did that, of course. And throughout my career, I think I was probably at a job maybe 2 years for each job. I think maybe the maximum place that I was at was when I was right before this job that I have right now, the supervisor job at Optum. That was probably the longest I had been anywhere because I always wanted to learn and grow. It wasn't so much of oh, I'm kind of done with this place and I don't want to be doing this anymore, but it was more so let me get to the next place where I don't know something and I want to learn. And that's kind of how my journey was in my career. And so, but going into real estate, it was obviously a whole other experience. And so as I was, going through it, one of my goals was understanding it, number one. And then I ended up getting my license for real estate because I just thought it would be easier for me to be looking for deals, for me to be understanding all the different areas. And so I ended up getting my real estate license. And so, as obviously I had to, learn and study for that. And so, but yeah, after I got that, it was really about, okay, I already know, of course, real estate has so many different things. You have your fix and flip, you have your buy and holds, you have your Airbnb, you have it's just so many things, right? But all of these different things are really, if you look at it, it's just different exit strategies that you have to learn, just because if you're acquiring a property and that property is not, let's just say I'm going to put it this way. Let me take a step back. I'm going to put it this way. So the way that you want to look at a property is when you're acquiring it, how many different ways, let's just say if this doesn't work, do you have another option? So that's kind of how you want to have multiple strategies, basically. That's kind of what you want to do in real estate. So looking at and learning all these different things. And I wanted to be able to, because I was going into obviously helping the senior community, I was like, I have to know other things. I can't just be like, okay, let me just sell the house. And, I'm obviously going to be honest with you and whatever I think is the best situation for you. But at the same time, obviously the trust aspect. But at the same time, I was like, okay, let's just say there's other scenarios that come up. How am I going to be able to tackle this? Right. So then I already knew obviously I had learned how to find properties, how to do fix and flips. And I was thinking, okay, the next step is really going into learning creative finance, right? Because some people have a lot of equity in their property and they don't want to be paying a lot of taxes on that. So you just kind of want to, have options of what can they do? What other options they have. So I just learned that. I learned creative finance. And so I think that my only other thing that I haven't really been in, I've dabbled in a little bit in, but not really acquired or, have done any of these components yet, would be, which is on my goal to do, is multifamily and also a ground up construction. So I haven't done either one yet. And so I'm excited to test those out. And I think, of course, with that too, it comes, you have to have certain education on that as well. So of course, what do? You go to the people that do it, right? So you have to get educated by the people that are, well versed in that. So to me, I think that the way that I've accomplished my goals, really looking at all these different things, the reason why I'm kind of explaining this to you is that with all of this comes a certain amount of commitment. You have to have a commitment. You have to have tenacity. There's so many things that can go wrong, in real estate. It's like sometimes there's so many different components that an agent can give you one price and then you end up finding out, they're comping it, and then you end up finding out, especially if you're an out of state investor and you're not familiar with the area, you have to really rely on these real estate agents a lot of times. And so if they're giving you the wrong price and you're going off of that price, it's so challenging at the end because you didn't really, that's the price you have. And so everything else that you calculated, your costs of rehabbing it, your costs of, the money that you borrow and, the private money you borrow, all of those costs have to come into that, right? So if you don't have the right price point, what do you do, right? So there's a lot of challenges. And of course I had that, happen to me as well, where the agent didn't give me the right price. And so, you have to pivot and you have to do, what you have to do. Like on that property, like we didn't really make a lot of money, but we also didn't lose money. And so I think that some of those things are, these are things that come along with all of that, right? So, but I think that the most important thing is when you're acquiring something, you really have to have other exit strategies. You have to really look at, okay, let's just say I'm acquiring this as an Airbnb. What does that look like? Does that look like it's gonna be doing well, even though you calculate and everything's going to do, everything looks good on paper, but then it ends up where the Airbnb is not really forming. So then you have to kind of think about, okay, do I want to rent it out, or what do I want to turn this property into? Which is great. You have those options, but you still have to run numbers and you still have to have other exit strategies, right? So yeah, we set goals, we do things and we accomplish things, but at the same time, we have to be flexible and we have to be able to pivot. So we have to have all of that take all of that into consideration. So I I think that some of those things are really, really important to do is when you're setting goals to look at your capacity as well, right? Because you have you to rely on, and make sure that you're able to come out of that, whatever that situation is. So you want to be looking at your risk. You want to be looking at how high, how low is your risk? Are you able to manage that? But it just does take a lot of creative process. You have to be creative at, especially in real estate, right? Specifically. And I think just, even when you're dealing with people, you have to be flexible because every situation, every patient, every person, every scenario is going to be different. No one person is going to be the same. And so I think that that's what you want to be doing is being flexible. And, when you're setting goals, set smaller goals first. Don't try to go, trust me, I've been there and I've done this. I'm go big or go home type of person. But, in the end, it really is about going smaller and then growing and scaling. That's pretty much what you want to do. That's one of the most important things. Don't just go all in and then you burn yourself. And so, you kind of want to start small and kind of go through the kinks, right? And then once you kind of have that down, then you can scale it and go, bigger if you need to, or to different states if you need to, whatever the case may be, whatever your business is. But make sure that whatever you're doing is, if you're wanting to scale it, it's a scalable business. You don't want to get into something that is not scalable, because then you have nothing really to scale. So always, think about what your goals are up front, what are you trying to accomplish, and then build on that. That's really what I would recommend doing. And ultimately you have to be patient, stay consistent, and it all ends up working out. And if it's not meant for you, it won't be. Don't try to push it. And also try to set some time, like a time frame where, obviously in any business, you're going to need some time to not only work through the kinks, but really to see the fruits of that labor per se, right? So I think that you just want to give yourself enough time, but set a time frame of how long am I able to really get this beating, right? If it doesn't end up working out. So, but a lot of times don't get disappointed, because a majority of the entrepreneurs, this is what it is for entrepreneurs. You're going to get into something, some things are going to work out and some things aren't, and some things are going to take off and some things won't. So you just have to be able to tolerate all of that and have the backing and and just being able to really tolerate it yourself. So I would say those are the main things that, I would say. As I, for myself, I continue going and I have to pivot. And of course, at this point, I'm pivoting a little bit, right? With the real estate market being what it is. But, ultimately, if you set your goals and you stick to it and you work hard at it, it's going to be okay. You just have to, again, give yourself time and, make sure that you're not really wasting a lot of time being in this and putting more money and more resources into something that's really not going anywhere. So I hope this is helpful. I hope this helped. And if you guys have any questions, obviously follow me. I think below there's a link of all of my social media sites. And also, if you guys have any questions, you can always email me. Our email is below this as well. So thank you so much for joining me again, and I'll see you on the next one.